and welcome. What I'd like to do is actually start my session off with a quote from a Greek philosopher that you'll probably all recognize, and that is that the only constant in life is change. And that sums up my feelings about the world of digital media really well. See, when I was younger, I used to share a big iMac computer with my family as like this bright-colored box. If I was playing games, I was playing Snake on my Nokia phone, and I was lucky to be upgraded to a Nintendo on my handheld. And back then, if you heard the term artificial intelligence, it's likely you're probably watching a sci-fi movie. But so much has changed since then, and even for me as a research professional, it can be very difficult to keep on top of. So that's kind of what I want to be going through today. I want to introduce you to global syndicated research. I want to show you why data is so important to understand your audience and ultimately who GWI is and how they can help you with that. Obviously, we already had a quick introduction, but I will just go through it myself again. My name is Tom. I'm a senior trends analyst at GWI working in our London office. I spend a lot of my time researching digital media trends, social media, artificial intelligence, and a host of other topics. So I'm well placed today to give you insights that should hopefully get you thinking. But with that in mind, I just want to go through why data is so important. The way to think about it is that if you don't have it, it's almost like you're wandering around in the dark. And as we've already had an example with today, we know the giants like Amazon are already using it to their advantage. It's essential to understand your audience's behaviors, and especially since you want to effectively communicate and market to them. The problem with that as well is that you need to know which platforms consumers are using. You need to understand their media behaviors, but not just in one moment, but how that is changing over time. And ongoing trended data is absolutely key to this. And finally, there's lots of stereotypes and false information out there. And by using data, that can help you separate the hype from reality and make more informed decisions. So, GWI, or Global Web Index, as you might have heard. How can they help you solve these problems and provide answers? Well, as I said, GWI is an audience insights research company. Our SaaS platform and custom data products are trusted by the world's biggest brands, media organizations, and agencies on a daily basis, so they can dive into their audiences at speed. And it represents around 2.8 billion internet users across 53 markets. Which obviously that's huge figures, and in our main core survey alone, we interview around 1 million people every year. So let's get into great detail. That's not all we do loads more. Core is our main flagship product, and that's what I'm going to use at various points throughout this presentation. But there are some others, such as GWI USA, which allows us to understand the views of consumers in America in all 50 states. We're also going to use GWI Kids, which researches 8 to 15-year-olds, so we can understand how those sort of emerging behaviors occur. And then finally, we have GWI Zeitgeist, which is something that we field monthly. This one's slightly different because we're allowed to do different questions each time we field it, so we can understand how these things sort of are important to people in the moment. And of course, it sounds like a lot of words, but I want to give you just one example to try and explain what this looks like in practice. So let's say that I want to understand Gen Z consumers in Spain. Through our data, I can see what their attitudes and interests are, the social media platforms they use, how often they exercise, the apps they use to listen to music, and even the groceries they buy from the supermarket. If I wanted to, I could then compare that to the general population of Spain to see how these behaviors are distinctive or if they're not at all. But then I could even dig deeper than that. If I wanted to look within Gen Z, I could see how this varies by household sort of family composition, income, or even the region they live in. So you can already see that if you're a media organization, an agency, or publishers, how this is incredibly valuable information to have. For us, for a number of reasons. It can help you get new customers, mean you can refine your offerings, and ultimately as well for things like brand awareness. So as I said to you, I'm going to give you data across 53 markets that we'll cover, so I'll give you some global insights. Given the fact we're in Madrid as well, I also want to take the opportunity to focus specifically on some Spanish-speaking markets, which we'll do with data from consumers in Spain, Colombia, Argentina, Mexico, and Chile. You can see that highlighted in the light pink on screen. But we're also able to give you insights on Hispanic consumers in the US, which I will call out at various points throughout this presentation. If you struggle to kind of keep on top of that, hopefully you can all see the bottom right of the screen as we get through. But on the charts, there'll be a little sign which will tell you the markets that are covered, just to provide some clarity. So, what are we covering? First, we're going to break down to 3 sections, and the first is being a global media overview. We're going to try and look at how long people spend online, the devices they use, and things like their motivations for using the internet. The second section, we're going to go into the reading more specifically. We're going to look at the interest in print media, how long people are spending reading, and the effect this is having on trust in the news. And then finally, we're going to move on to artificial intelligence, which I know you're going to hear about a lot today. We're going to be looking at sort of how interests and concerns are balanced and how these sort of attitudes towards it are evolving. We're going to look at how much it's being used and then specifically give you some examples of its influence on the book sector. So, global media overview, let's get on it. So, up until 2016, the story was that we're spending more and more time online and we didn't know when we'd reach that ceiling. But soon enough, we actually found it. The peaks in time spent online were actually found in 2020 and 2021, which you can probably predict is down to lockdowns from the COVID pandemic. But that didn't last forever. We got back outdoors, returned to work, and started traveling again. So it's slightly tailed off, but has now plateaued. And we feel that this is about the new normal level that we're going to see. But the most important part here as well is how the changes in device usage are for when we used to go online. So mobile has become more and more important, and non-mobile devices have become less prominent in how we get online in the first place. That's the global trend, but it doesn't apply everywhere. So in Latin America, it's absolutely true that mobiles are absolutely a priority of using a device to get online, but Spain is different. In Spain, consumers are actually as likely to use non-mobile devices, They use spend as much time on non-mobile devices as they do mobile devices when they use the internet. What's relevant to the room is for those that are interested in books and literature, they're actually spending more time on non-mobile devices on a daily basis than they are on their mobiles. It's really interesting insight and it's quite simple, but ultimately highlights how you need to understand where your audience is actually based and these things like device usage so you can actually target them properly. What this influences as well is device ownership. There's been a lot of changes in the devices that we own since 2015. Also, you can read it for yourselves, but I'll go through it. So we can see as well that since 2015, smart TVs are now more commonly owned than tablets, and even smart watches are now more commonly owned than games consoles. And what we can think of this as, mobiles almost act as a domino effect, connecting us to other aspects of our digital lives. You think of having your smartwatch metrics for your health and track them on your phone. You think of watching streaming services on your television and using your phone as the remote control, or even connecting it to your home appliances. So today we're using smaller screens to scroll and larger screens are often connected. And this actually could present a lot of opportunities, and it depends completely how you want to look at it. The fact we're watching YouTube on our TV and short form on mobiles is really interesting. But this kind of links to something I think is kind of more interesting in itself, and that's actual people's motivations for going online in the first place. So with this in mind, there's actually a question that we ask in every wave of our core research, and it's really, really basic, and that is, what are your reasons for using the internet? And again, simple question, but it allows us to gain some really interesting insights. So we can see that between 2018 and 2023, the keeping up to date with news and events was the second largest motivation for going online, but now it's its fourth, and that's below sort of staying in touch with friends and family and watching videos, TV shows, or movies. There is obviously a few reasons for this, but one of the major ones is media trust, but I'm going to save that topic for later in this talk. For now, what I want to focus on is the most important, so finding information was top in 2018, and it still is today, but the biggest change is finding new ideas or inspiration. That's a really important thing to keep on top of, because it kind of helps you understand how the internet has evolved. Consumers are increasingly looking for inspiration online, and the onus is with brands to actually give that to them. And here's why. So obviously, it's got a lot of implications for how you want to reach your audience, because consumers don't just want to be sold to. They want to be inspired by what they watch or see online. As you see in Spain, TikTok users are 16% more likely than average to say they discuss books. So what can publishers do about this? The fact is it's really important to take part in and to drive these discussions, especially because these digital forums are encouraging a lot of younger readers or consumers to read more regularly. It's very clear that social media is an incredibly powerful tool, and you'll hear about it from a few of us today. But it's not just young consumers or adults in general that are going to be influenced by this. We do have data from kids to kind of show that. So we saw that Gen Z were actually the first generation to say they're more likely to discover products using social media than they are through search engines. We actually expect this to be a similar case across generations. The gap is sort of shortening. Millennials are likely to cross it soon. But this is the big milestone in our research, and we've spotted it elsewhere too. So among 12 to 15-year-olds in Mexico and Spain who listen to music, podcasts, or audiobooks, they're now more likely to discover them through hearing it on social media than they are through using a traditional search engine. But it's not just this kind of discovering audio content this has an impact on. Even among Gen Z job hunters in Spanish-speaking markets, around 1 in 4 say they're going to look for new jobs through ads on their own personal social media. So rest assured, whatever it is you do for work, you are going to be judged on how you present yourself on social media when it comes to recruitment. So you have to impress these kind of readers, job buyers, job hunters and buyers. But when it comes to social media, it's really, really important that it's not just about reach. You need to understand how people are using each platform itself. Because usage motivations give a much clearer picture of how expectations are shifting among each platform's user base. I will just make it clear here that this is data that doesn't include China and India for very simple reasons. They have very unique social media ecosystems, so we tend not to count them in the global analysis, and also they're huge markets. They really influence global figures like this. But we'll just start with some really, really basic ones just to sort of set the foundation here. Facebook is the most used social media platform in the world. WhatsApp is the platform that consumers say is their favorite, and Instagram is the platform that consumers say has the most influence in shaping cultural trends, right? Didn't mention TikTok there, but you can see it's changing rapidly. People are now going to TikTok more to follow and find information about products and brands, to keep up to date with the news in the world. Instagram also follows a similar trend as a growing place to message friends and family. Just to add some context to this slide, each data here is based among the users on each platform. So just because a platform is growing in total users does not necessarily influence these figures. These are genuine shifts in usage motivations on each platform, which is incredibly important to keep on top of. And the reason is that it allows you to tailor your promotional strategies, which is obviously key, and naturally craft messaging which resonates with the needs of users on each platform, because no two platforms are the same. Hope that was interesting. Section 2. We're going to have a look at how and what people are reading. So it's kind of quite easy for younger people to think that especially online press became popular during the pandemic because it's the first time they kind of actively engaged with it on a regular basis, but that's just not the truth. We can see that in our data that online press has taken up a large percentage of consumers' time reading press all the way back since 2012. So this is not a new trend at all. We can also see there are shifts among the Hispanic population in the US who are kind of taking social media more to read the news. So it's just further shifting it in the favor of online forums. And this itself has had a number of effects. So I just want to say, also we discussed already how post-pandemic we're taking a step back from our digital devices. And for that reason, a lot of online media types have seen a slight decrease in engagement. Nothing normal there, or nothing unusual there. But news publishers actually have a specific set of reasons to be concerned with these shifts. Because not only are consumers reading news less, which is often because they feel overwhelmed by the news that we're reading, they're actually trusting it less in general. And people who trust the news less are actually less likely to actively seek it out. And as we discussed already, we've got elections this year, we've got loads of AI fakes, and that's something that could even get worse still. It's a really important thing, it's something I'll sort of say quite a few times during the rest of this talk, is it's really important to act with transparency here. If you're putting content out, you need to disclose conflicts of interest and make really clear when things are opinion pieces or fact. And also, we've mentioned TikTok. If you want, consumers don't mind short-form clips, and you may do well to offer it. But you have to be key here to make sure things are light-hearted, make sure your views are balanced, and absolutely, again, fact-checked when you're publishing them. So books is an important part for us all. How are books faring? So despite the fact we orientate our lives so much around the digital world, interest in books is actually really high. This one might surprise you. So if we look at consumers in Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Spain, and the Hispanic population in the US, books and literature have a greater interest in games, news and current affairs, and even watching sports, which as a sport fan myself, I was surprised by. And I do want to dispel another myth here as well. You might think that our young consumers are not interested in books. That's not true, again, necessarily. It is in some cases, but not always. Gen Z in Argentina are actually more interested in books and literature than baby boomers in Argentina. Interesting insight. So the key here is that news is definitely more online, but physical print books are still popular. And the reason for this is that in our research, we know that people prefer to read books rather than listen to them because it allows them more room for personal interpretation. Generally, just it's a better experience. Think if you're on public transport and you want to escape. So, not all the audio formats are dead. I know audiobooks will be brought up a few times today, but where do they fit in this sort of landscape? I should start by saying that demand for them is actually steady, with around 14% of consumers in Spanish-speaking markets, including Hispanics in the US, saying they've listened to an audiobook in the last week. But that's barely changed since the start of 2021. So the value here doesn't lie in sort of how many people they reach, but who they're actually reaching. I'll explain the chart because it just make it a little bit simpler for you all. What it basically shows is how much more likely audiobook listeners are in the Spanish-speaking markets to have done the following compared to the general population of these Spanish-speaking markets. So you can see behaviours that are distinctive. So you see they're more than twice as likely to have posted on opinions online about personal finance, investment, and even business, and more than twice as likely to have used blogging, forum, and messaging board websites. So just having a brief understanding of what these things stand out can try and sort of give you an idea of who it is that you want to target. So it's essential, really, if you are still considering audiobooks, that you need to align your content to your audience. And understanding their preferences and behaviours will ultimately determine your route to success with this. And that means you're going to need to be guided by their consumption habits. So podcast. So everyone thinks that podcast is kind of a hot new thing. It's not really the truth. We know that podcast engagement is actually plateaued when you look at it from a global view, whereas Spanish-speaking markets, they're completely different. You know, you see from 24% say they've listened to a podcast in the last week at the start of 2021, up to 32%. For the book sector, those interested in books and literature stand much, much higher. So there's a really engaged audience there. And we also see this story emerging among kids too. So when we look at 12 to 15-year-olds in Mexico and Spain, stories are one of the top 3 most listened to podcast genres among this group. Interesting. Then we also have platforms like Reddit, and you've got this subreddit called r/books, which is the 18th most popular on the platform. You get a lot of users actively going to there to ask other users on the Reddit platform for advice on the kind of podcast that they should listen to. So again, the kind of thing I want to get across here is that you can often see podcasts as a bit of a threat, but I think you should coexist with them. If anything, for the publishers, they could be seen as more of an opportunity to evolve and adapt your offering and even thrive in digital environments. So finally, we're going to be on to our last section here, which is on AI technology, and I hope there's some interesting points to take away for you all here. I wanted to put artificial intelligence in context. Because attitudes towards emerging technology, they tend to move really, really fast, and we can see just by trending things over a year where hype around something tends to meet its reality. So things like the Internet of Things, blockchain technology, which includes cryptocurrency, and metaverse have all fallen in interest. I should just make clear here, this is consumers who say they're excited about the technology. The excitement is falling off. This is obviously just a brief snapshot of attitudes, which shows how artificial intelligence is growing. And especially in Latin America, over half consumers say they're excited, whereas among Hispanics in the US, it's around a third, so they're a little bit more reserved about its potential. But this thing with AI as well is actually in an early stage of its hype cycle, and we believe that this is actually going to continue longer than these other technologies have, for a very simple reason that it touched on things close to people's hearts, like job security. And obviously, this kind of highlights why you need solid audience data to try and understand how these things are evolving. And again, why do you need granular data? Well, attitudes are complex. This chart on screen is slightly different than the one before. Before, we were showing you how many consumers say they're excited. Here, we're showing you how many say they are interested in or worried about artificial intelligence. So a slightly different perspective. What we can see already is that between the end of 2022 and mid-2023, the number of Hispanic Americans or Hispanic consumers in the US who said are worried about AI technology doubled. But the thing you have to counter it with is they're actually more interested in artificial intelligence than average in America. So they have a standout interest in it. Obviously, publishers in the room, those who are interested in books and literature have even more interest. So we see 25% among all Hispanic Americans. For those who are interested in books and literature, it's at 33%. So we've got really an engaged group when it comes to artificial intelligence. And obviously, there is a kind of an onus here that you do need it to stay competitive, but you have to think incredibly carefully about how you look to implement the technology yourselves. But not only is there greater interest in the technology itself, we find that Hispanic consumers are actually actively using it regularly, which is really interesting. So 46%, when we surveyed this in February this year, 46% of consumers in the US defined as Hispanic said they used AI tools at least weekly in the last month. Compared that to 34% among the whole population. It's a very simple explanation for this, and if you want to get into it, and that's obviously because the Hispanic population in the US is younger. But then you can think of it on the other side, and that's a very engaged audience. So there's a lot of potential within that. And we know how powerful these tools can be at driving efficiency, collating information, et cetera, but that ultimately depends on trust. And the kind of content that people most trust for AI-generated content that is educational content. Whereas if you have content that's sort of oriented towards social issues, financials, medical, or even health, there's a lot less trust there. So depending on where you're actually in, what sort of kind of books you're sort of servicing, you could actually start to look at how you introduce it. And we've already had one example. The example with Le Monde and Police Amelia is with OpenAI is really, really interesting. And it kind of shows how publishers can gain exposure through partnerships and even build trust through that too. Now, we've already seen that educational content is seen as more reliable, but that is not to say that consumers want AI involved in all aspects of their book experience at all. Though you can see on the chart, there is some demand. There is some demand for AI-generated books. But the reality is that consumers really value the physical books and reading them, and they also value authors' perspectives. So they don't want it to completely disrupt their reading experience. And obviously, we can compare this to video games, music, comedy videos, TV and film. There's far greater interest in more visual elements than there is in the actual written elements. And there has already been some sort of controversy around authors who've used ChatGPT when they've won prize-winning novels. Again, the important thing here is transparency. We need to be transparent about how we're using AI, because not all consumers are going to react positively if you're using it extensively. And how do you do that? I think it's quite simple. It's about experimenting with it, but you really need to understand the tolerances of your audience, and that starts by opening discussions with themselves. They need to sort of feel part of it, and if anything, it'll make it seem kind of more open, honest, and open-minded in general. So what I wanted to close on in this section is using data to map out specific groups' concerns and areas of interest. And I'm doing that with students, and hopefully that might be relevant to some of you here. So the interesting thing here, it goes back to the chart where you looked at the interest and concern and worries, is that you can quickly highlight on an attitude basis how positive and negative feelings can almost contradict each other. So we see that there's nearly as many students that are concerned about AI easily being used for unethical purposes like cheating or spreading misinformation, as there are that say they use AI tools for learning new languages, code assistance, or personal organization. Really interesting. But what this kind of highlights is that if you're actually a brand that operates within that space, you can look to sort of feed those needs of consumers, to learn new languages, code assistance, personal organization. But the key is showing them that what you're acting or how you're doing isn't unethical. That's absolutely important. And obviously, this example here is just kind of, again, a snapshot of attitudes. But you really need to keep on top of how data is being used over time so you have more of a sort of understanding of their perspective. For publishers, that's a point I'm hammering home today. You can use AI, but just make sure you use it well, and transparency needs to be at the front of everything that you're doing, and always use data for your direction. Because you see just by doing this here that you're no longer wandering around in the dark. That's all from me today, but I will quickly just run you through these talking points before you applaud, because I'm sure it was great. So time spent online isn't changing, but the devices that we use to access the internet is. And also that represents a shift in motivations, because consumers increasingly want to be inspired by their online experiences. Then we also have the people read the news online, but they discover books through social. There's obviously some concerns about the impact of AI and things on physical print, but there is demand on it, and authors are really valued still. And finally, interest in AI is rising, but AI-generated books aren't the primary interest. Obviously, it's such a big technology that it's kind of quite hard to grasp how you may look to implement it or what effects it may have. But ultimately, the people prefer visual media first, but sector still has to kind of look out for how this may affect them. And what I will say as well, if you have any questions, that's my email address on screen, and you can please write to me in English or Spanish, and I will get back to you. And also, if not, you can message me on LinkedIn. That is my name there. So I hope you found everything interesting today.